Jeremy.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be invited back to come and talk to you a little bit about the economy and what we're seeing and what's happening. As usual, I have way too many slides and not enough time, so I'm going to go quickly. I will apologize in advance for that. Let's start. We might as well start at the beginning. Here he is. The giant elephant that's in the room, right? We've all seen this stuff. Are we heading into a recession? Is a recession sort of inevitable? The Wall Street Journal came out with a leading economist from across the United States having an expectation that we are going to head into recession into 2020. Economists do not have the best record. As a matter of fact, a 2001 report indicated that the record of failure to predict recessions is virtually unblemished among economists. And my personal favorite from Dr. John Maynard Keynes, I look forward to the day when economists manage to get themselves thought of as humble, competent people on the level with dentists. Remarkable, right? So let's just take a look at it. The Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank, they survey since 1968 of all forecasters. They do a survey of professional forecasters around the entire United States. They looked 4 quarters in advance. This is the projections they've had since 1968. You will notice that they never, ever one time, a full year in advance, project that we're actually going to go into recession. What actually happened looks something a little bit more like this. Forecasters don't do a great job about this, which is why you always hear them talk about 2 years out, because no one's going to go back and look that far. If we look at it and we sort of say, okay, let's look over the recessions, what actually happens if we look at it from 2001 to 2018, this is what actually happened. This is the September forecast in the prior year, right? They don't get it anywhere close. The one in the middle is the January forecast of the current year, and then the May forecast of the current year. So what this essentially says is, if you let me get halfway through the year, I'm going to be great at telling you what's going to happen during that year. Yeah, not so much. And we're not the only ones. The Economist has been looking at this among 15 countries, over 100,000 forecasts over time. And everybody gets it wrong if you go back in time. There's nothing wrong with that. If we look at it in terms of the longest economic expansions, if we make it to June, it will be the longest expansion in modern U.S. history, right? That is a good thing for us. And this has somehow led everyone to the conclusion that, if we make it all the way to June, it must be time for us to go into a recession. But recessions don't happen because of time. All those gray bars represent recessions. You can see what has happened. Everything from the tech crash to the subprime crisis to problems internationally that lead us into recessions. The answer is we grow for very similar reasons. We decline for very different ones. The ability to project exactly when that's going to happen or how that's going to happen is virtually impossible to do, right? In addition to that, I think it is important to note that time really has almost nothing to do with it. This has also been among the slowest, actually the slowest economic recovery or economic expansion in modern U.S. history. On average, we've grown about 4.4% per year. Over the 37 quarters of this expansion, we have only grown by 2.3%, slower than any other expansion in modern United States history. If we look at the market, the stock market is up, the stock market is down. This is a measure of exactly that overall, right? You see the VIX, the volatility that's there on the far right-hand side. It's not out of whack. It's not on order with what we've seen during recessionary periods, but our elephant is absolutely right. A recession, let me go back. I went a little quick. The recession is absolutely inevitable. There's no doubt about that. It's going to happen sooner or later. Whether it's going to happen this year, next year, the year after, is something that's almost impossible to tell. If you're going to ask me, there are a number of reasons that we could head into recession. Number one is debt. Number two is aggressive monetary policies, right? We have had almost essentially near free money for a long period of time. What about a prolonged prolonged government shutdown, right? About $1.2 billion every week the government remains shut down. We're now in the longest one in history. Economists are saying that should reduce our growth by about half to 3.6%. The White House came out yesterday and said that they think it could drop it to 0% growth in the first quarter of the year. International trade instability, global housing crisis, global conflict. Any of these could lead us to a recession. Some probably will. And if there's one I'm going to point to, I think we should spend just a little bit of time talking about debt. I've said it before, I will say it again. I have tried to explain to my brother-in-law the same thing I will try to explain to everybody else. It is a lot easier to spend money you don't have than it is to pay back money you don't have, right? So let's look at the federal government. This is public debt as a percentage of GDP. It is now 104%, the highest level in the history of the United States. Not bad for all of us who get to spend it, not so good for all of our kids who get to pay it back. And let's compare that against corporate debt, consumer debt, and student debt, all at the highest levels we have ever seen. We as a nation are going to have to pay this back at some point. That will create a headwind for us. It will slow the economy and ultimately lead us into some degree of slower economic growth, potentially even a recession. That's just what it is. For the record, I am contractually obligated to go over the fundamentals with you. So if that's the national economy and that's the sort of the recession that's out there, and we know that there's some instability, but it's not likely, the ability to determine exactly when it's going to rear its head is a little bit difficult. Let's look at some of the fundamentals right here at home. Let's look at things like population growth and employment growth and wages and salaries, all the things that matter to our economy here. Here we go. Let's start with population growth. The state of Nevada is now #1 in the United States relative to population growth, growing at about 2.09%. Now, for the record, when the Census Bureau came out with this, they actually said that Nevada and Idaho were tied at 2.1%. We took the liberty of taking it out one more decimal place. Ha ha, Idaho, we're #1 again, right? If we look at it here in southern Nevada, right, where do we rank? If we look at the top 30 metropolitan areas in the United States, we are growing at 2.2%, roughly 3 times the national average in terms of population growth. The migration that we're seeing is continuing to move in. If we look at driver's license surrenders, where are people coming from? Not surprisingly, 36% of the population is moving in from California. It's nice that we have the 7th largest economy on planet Earth immediately to the west of us, and no matter what Nevada does, California does something worse, right? Which allows more people to continue to move in. What is the primary reason? Why are they coming? #1 is to get a job. #2 is retirement. #3 is lifestyle. And arguably more important than that is the income of the newcomers. There's been some suggestion that everybody that's coming here doesn't have any income that they're bringing with them. Absolutely not the case. You will see that there's a substantial amount of income. As a matter of fact, more than half having more than $75,000 in household income that are moving in. The Federal Jobs and Tax Act changed dramatically the tax liability for people living in California. That is creating increased incentive to move in. We are seeing it across the board, okay? If that's population growth and the #1 motivation for people moving into Nevada is employment growth, let's look at the employment growth figures. Surprise, surprise, Nevada is also #1 in the entire United States relative to employment growth. We are creating jobs faster than anywhere else in the entire United States. As a matter of fact, 3.8%, better than 2 times the national average relative to job formation. If we look at southern Nevada relative to the top 30 metropolitan areas in the country, that number is 3.4%. We're behind Phoenix and Orlando, and actually Houston just jumped in front of us. There will be a strongly worded letter to the mayor of Houston as a result of that. Right? We have added back every job that we lost during the economic downturn and roughly 100,000 more in southern Nevada. That is terrific for us. We are arguably pound for pound, if not among the most prolific economies in the United States today. This is what the recession looks like. That's what 90 consecutive months of year-over-year growth looks like in our economy. That is strength. And what is most compelling about this chart is if you look at the far right-hand side of it, you actually see that that rate of growth is increasing, not decreasing. Certainly, we've seen it slow, but again, even if we slow, we're still well above national averages overall. And when we look at employment growth, every sector of our economy is adding jobs today, save mining and save information, which are essentially flat over where they were a year ago. We have added 34,000 jobs overall, including almost 8,000 jobs in leisure and hospitality. hospitality, our most core industry. I would also suggest that construction would actually likely be number one, although we're having a difficult time, of course, getting enough construction workers in for all of the projects that are planned, proposed, and under construction in Southern Nevada. This is the unemployment rate. You can see where where the Las Vegas MSA is versus the United States, which is very important overall. But I would argue what is more important is the bars that are at the far bottom of my chart here. This is the difference between the United States and the Las Vegas MSA, and you can see that that amount has continued to shrink over time. In addition to that, if we look at our changing employment base, we have diversified our economy more than anywhere else in the United States. This is where our employment was in 2000. This is where our employment was in 2018. You can see the net growth. Where are we adding the vast majority of the jobs? Business and professional services, education and healthcare, then leisure and hospitality, then trade, transportation, and utilities. If we look at our growth, where we were in 2000, you see that the pie actually changes. I'll do that one again just because I think it's cool, right? There we are in 2000. Whoa, there we are in 2018, right? It's actually shifting right underneath us. And you see where that change is. Business and professional services has added 3.2% to its share, while leisure and hospitality has dropped by 4.3%. This is, by definition, economic diversification of our economy. And if we use very fancy ways of thinking about economic diversification, this is something called the Hochman Index. It measures how diversified our economy is versus all economies around the United States. You want to be as close to 100 as possible. You can see where we were in 2000, where we are today. That is a strengthening in our economy in terms of its diversification overall. Now, we were number one in population growth. We were number one in employment growth. The state of Nevada also recently became number one in personal income growth, right? Pretty remarkable. In economic terms, we think about this as the trifecta in terms of economic development, activity, health, and expansion. So, growing by an annual rate of about 6.21%. You can see kind of how the map plays out there. When we look at average weekly wages and hours worked, we are seeing some differentials in the economy overall in terms of how they've recovered and how they've changed. At the bottom is the amount of hours that are being worked by leisure and hospitality employees. On the top are the hours that are being worked by construction employees, and they're shown there. What we do know is that there's a pretty big differential, and that we've traded a lot of full-time work for part-time work, and we're continuing to work our way back relative to that overall. However, I do want to point to the earnings numbers, because construction is now the highest weekly paid in of any major sector in the economy, continuing to grow and reflecting the fact that we are probably between 10 and 15,000 construction workers short of being able to staff everything that's in the development pipeline today. It is pretty remarkable and very rewarding to go out and look at projects like the stadium project. And I know this isn't easy to see, but getting a picture of all of those fluorescent vests of the guys that are actually going to work, right? When the economy turned down, when we were at our worst, we lost 1 out of every 7 employees in our community, 180,000 employees overall. We lost 2 out of every 3, or 66% of construction employees. Among those 180,000 employees that lost their job, 90,000 of them were in the construction industry. So seeing those guys get back to work is pretty rewarding overall. Wages are going up, but what about cost of living? How do we compare that wage increase? That's terrific that we're all making more money and we're seeing personal income grow, but are we keeping pace with the cost of living? This is the cost of living index going back to 2008 and where we are today, right? You can see that we used to be about 110% of the national average. That dipped down during the economic downturn. It came back up afterward, and we've sort of ebbed and flowed a little bit on the right-hand side of our chart. If we layer over that what our income growth has done, that line that's going across, the horizontal line, is essentially 0, and you can get a sense of where we were beneath it and where we've been over it. Most recently, we are actually seeing wages and salaries and incomes outstrip the cost of living. That's positive. However, in some specific areas, like housing prices, shown by the dark line, the lighter line is average weekly wages, you can see that those two are moving away from each other. Housing is becoming less affordable in our community. Perhaps an easier way to see this is something called the Housing Opportunity Index. A very simplified version of this is that it shows you what percentage of the population can own a median-priced house. Right? At the peak of the market, when housing prices dropped all the way to about $100,000 a unit, about 90% of people could afford a home. Unfortunately, none of them had a job, so they weren't going to be able to buy a house. But nonetheless, they could afford it. You see where we are today at about 47, 48%. You also see on the far left-hand side of our chart that the low point relative to that was about 13% of our population was able to afford a home when housing prices were absolutely off the charts. Now, here's the punchline relative to all of this. Our housing prices are roughly back to where they were, pretty darn close to where they were back there in 2006 and 2007. But our incomes have actually risen greater than that, allowing for some balancing. Is it good? No. Are we concerned about affordable housing? You're darn right we're concerned about affordable housing. But it's not quite as bad as some have suggested that it is. Where it is acutely problematic is something called the missing middle. This is the difference between people who don't earn enough to receive any kind of assistance as it relates to housing, but also cannot afford housing on the other side. We believe this is about 186,000 households, about 129,000 families, and about 73,000 households with children. We do believe that this is a problem for us, and as the price of housing continues to increase relative to those incomes, it is displacing families out of home ownership, out of even apartment living, and even increasing the incidence of homelessness in Southern Nevada. It is going to be a problem for us. It is going to increase over time. All right, we're number one in the country in terms of population growth. We're number one in the country in terms of employment growth. We're number one in the country in terms of wage and salary growth, at least as a state, and darn close to that in terms of the metropolitan area. But what about business formation? What about small business, big business? What about the number of businesses that we are actually creating? 68% of all businesses statewide are located in Clark County. On the right-hand side of my chart is how many businesses we have created between 2006 and 2018, and that black portion of that pie chart is the number of businesses that have less than 5 employees. Small business is a huge part of who we are as a community and a huge part of the increase in businesses that we have seen over the past decade. Nonetheless, if we look at where the jobs actually exist today, you can see that the businesses with fewer than 5 folks employ about 67,000, let's call it 68,000 employees, where those with more than 100 employees employ about 560,000 employees overall, right? That distinction in terms of how we're forming businesses, how they're growing, how they're developing is going to be critically important to us. Making sure that Southern Nevada is a great place for small businesses to expand, because that's where businesses are being formed, and where larger businesses have the ability to prosper, because that's where the employees are working, is going to be a balance we're going to need to work on. And we'll talk a little bit more as we continue to go through. In terms of economic development and diversification, there's a lot going on in this chart, but I absolutely love it, so I was going to bring it here and just show it to you. This is the impact of $1 billion worth of investment in advanced manufacturing, in leisure and hospitality, and in sports and entertainment. And I could probably spend an entire presentation just talking about this chart, right? What those little shaded areas around are the industries that are supported in terms of supplier purchases and businesses and employees that go out and spend their money in the community relative to that. So when you think about advanced manufacturing, that sort of tan color to the left-hand side there is trade, transportation, and utilities. What is the value of a company like Tesla? The ability to export out of the state of Nevada and leverage our transportation infrastructure. What about leisure and hospitality? What if we look there? Look at all of the different businesses, from retail to healthcare to professional services to finance, that are used by that $1 billion. And sports and entertainment, not only does it generate more jobs than any of the others that are out there, but look at its intersection with that dark brown color. That is leisure and hospitality. Its ability to leverage the other elements of our economy, 150,000 hotel rooms, the second busiest origination destination airport in the country, hundreds of thousands of leisure and hospitality employees, is critical. Our ability to use both elements of that drives the economy forward. Now, if we're growing and our population is expanding and we're creating businesses, I talked a little bit about the housing market. There's been a ton about the housing market. It seems like we're getting extremely concerned, not the least of which is the result of a New York Times article that said crisis and consequences. This is actually the article. The epicenter of the housing bust is booming again. That's a warning sign. So we're clear, this is the New York Times giving all of you a warning sign that your housing market is likely to, has the potential to collapse and is showing a lot of problems. So let's go through and let's look at the actual math. On the left-hand side are new home sales. On the right-hand side are existing home sales. If we look at new home sales, and I'm just going to zoom in on that for a moment, when the market was at its absolute peak, we were constructing about 39,000 housing units every single year. When the market got to its lowest, we were at let's call it 4,000 housing units. This year, we will close on about 10,000 housing units, 1/3 of the number we were at when the market was at its peak. Is this completely out of whack? Well, sure. If you look at it from 2011 to 2018, oh my gosh, it's a 200% increase. The humanity, it's crazy. This is going to be oversupplied. Let's get a little deeper. If we look at it in terms of the new home share, are we losing balance in terms of how much new inventory is coming online? Is that resulting in the fact of a bunch of new standing inventory that's out there? No, not even close to that. So maybe this has everything to do with affordability. Maybe it's this disconnect between incomes and those type of things. So let's look at median home prices. On the left-hand side are new homes. On the right-hand side are existing homes. Yes, they're expensive. Yes, they have gone up. There's no doubt about it. But on the existing home side, the inventory of all the homes that are out there, we're barely back to where we were about a decade ago. And if we look at the fastest appreciating housing markets in the United States, which apparently has prompted everyone to be concerned, Nevada is #1 in the country at 15% year-over-year increase in values. Now, we have gone from being the fastest appreciating market in the United States to the fastest depreciating market in the United States. We are now, again, the fastest appreciating market in the United States. We refer to this as the economic roller coaster of doom, right? We don't want to have that continue to happen, right? I would rather see, and I know this is not going to be popular, I would rather to see a -1% growth rate in housing prices than a 10% increase in housing prices, because we need increased stability. But let's take it all with a grain of salt. This is where Las Vegas plays in. You get the idea. We're #1 overall. But let's look at actual housing prices versus markets where people are moving from. Here's single-family median home price in the 30 largest metropolitan areas in the entire country. You will see that we fall sort of in the middle of the pack. Not a bad place to be. And perhaps even more important than that is people seem to forget how far we fell in the first place. Yes, our housing prices have increased, but let's look at growth in values since 2005. Let's just look at that. We are the lowest among the Western states relative to property value increases since 2005, increasing by only 9%. The relativity of this, where we were at the outset, where we were when the market dropped out, where we are today, we need to take with a bit of a grain of salt. And here we are relative to Nevada homeowners' equity. And remember, the statement was, we are in crisis. Nevada is headed toward a crisis relative to this. So here's the percentage of underwater homes in the third quarter of 2010, when 70% of the homes in southern Nevada were underwater. Where were we in 2014? Well, fast forward by 14, we cut it to 25.4%. Where are we as of today? Only 4.7% of housing units in southern Nevada are currently underwater. And I have one better for you. Here's Nevada, here's the United States. Oh, the humanity of it all, us versus the country, right? We have built up so much increase in home equity. It is pretty good for us overall. We are more stable than we've been. Okay, so it's not that. It must then be the supply and the demand balance. Maybe there's a disconnect. Maybe that's what led the New York Times to draw this conclusion that we are inevitably headed toward crisis. So let's take a look, right? This is something called the EP ratio, or the number of housing units that we are constructing for every employee, if you will, that moves into the valley. Essentially, we want about 1 housing unit for every 1.3 employees. Today, we're only building one housing unit for every 2.84 employees, which means that everyone's millennial child has to jam right back in and continue to live with them, right? It just doesn't make any logical sense. The conclusion of this chart, and I know there's a lot going on here, is that we're not building enough housing, not that we have too little housing. And yet people look at this one and they say, Jeremy, no, you're wrong about this. Look at the increase in the number of homes that are available for sale. It's skyrocketing to 3.3 months of effective inventory. And so let's compare that against where the United States average is, 4.2 months. Southern Nevada, 3.3 months, right? Are we completely out of whack? Were we somehow completely out of whack in 2014? Were we out of whack in 2015? No. It is relative to where we were a year ago that has everyone sort of feeling like it's out of control. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't be leading into a problem. It doesn't mean that if that continues to go up, we're not going to have some concern. Of course we'd be concerned. But where we are today is just not indicative. It is more indicative of going back to something that is more normal than it was a year ago, as opposed to anything else. What about the median days on market? If I put my home up for sale, right, then how long does it take to sell? United States average, it takes 46 days to sell your home. Well, how long does it take in the Las Vegas area? 26 days to sell your home. December of last year was 19 days. Yeah, it's going to take you a week longer to sell your home, right? I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, right? But it can't be like this, right? This is where everybody was 3 months ago. Right? Everybody's loving the housing market. I can sell my home. I got all my equity back. I'm so excited. I'm going to look for a new home. Then 2 months ago, we started seeing some of this stuff. Oh, it's crazy. I don't know what to do. And then 1 month ago, it's like, it's coming to an end. And here's where we are today. Right? It just cannot be it. Housing markets do not change on a turn like that. They just don't flip like that. And so I think we need to be a little bit cautious about overreacting. That doesn't mean we want to build into it. It doesn't mean we need to be overly aggressive relative to the housing market. It doesn't mean if some of the trends that we're seeing today continue that we need to be increasingly cautious and monitor them. Of course we do, because that's the prudent thing to do. There's no doubt about that. I'm not saying that it's all roses and sunshine in the housing market. But what I am telling you is if we look at the fundamentals today, they are not out of line with either national averages or historical trends. Okay, so if that's the residential market, let's look at the commercial market. Healthy as we have seen in a long time. Office, industrial, and retail inventories are continuing to increase. Vacancy rates are down in every market from where they were and are continuing to decline. If we look at absorption, the amount of new space that's being occupied, that is increasing. If we look at planned and under construction space, it continues to come online at a very moderated level that keeps us pretty comfortable in terms of where we are. If we look at the changing landscape, a lot more build-to-suit in the office sector, a lot more shared office space that we're seeing develop overall. If we look in the industrial sector, we're seeing new clients like Amazon, expansions from places like Switch, and again, build-to-suits finding their way in, particularly in transportation. But guys like Matter are getting very creative relative to building new types of industrial space that are reflective of a new type of economy that tries to mirror some of the technology that's going on. Very positive for us overall. In the retail landscape, we've actually seen an increase in retail development, particularly in health clubs and furniture stores in conjunction with some of the housing stuff that we've seen. But there is no doubt that the overall trend is a continued increase in the amount of online sales activity. It will continue to dominate how we think about retail space in Southern Nevada and, frankly, Nevada as a whole. All of that having been said, we are now at the highest level of taxable retail sales in Southern Nevada's history. People are spending more money than they ever have in the history of Southern Nevada. Not bad. This is what 94 consecutive months of year-over-year expansion in consumption looks like. You see the recession, you see the expansion. Not bad. This is every major category of retail sales. Now, most of these are showing pretty strong growth rates, particularly in things like durable goods and building equipment because of the boom we're seeing in construction. Obviously, the one that has us concerned is food service and drinking places, heavily tied to visitor transactions, that type of activity. And so with some of the instability we've seen, we expect that to be a little softer. Nonetheless, it continues to grow overall. And if we look at it in inflation-adjusted per capita terms, That is to say, are we spending more money than we're earning? Are we essentially outstripping inflation? You see what it looked like there between 2004, 5, 6, and 7 in that sort of time frame when we were essentially buying homes, taking out home equity lines of credit, buying boats and everything else that we were doing in this valley. We don't look anything like that today. As a matter of fact, we are much more moderate than we were before. And no discussion of the fundamentals would be complete absent visitor volume and visitor spending. This is what the visitor volume curve looks like. It is up. It peaked in 2016. It has shown some coming down. This is the events of 1 October. And on the far right-hand side of this chart is November and October growth. We have same period comparisons in which we have seen some positives. We're certainly optimistic that when the December numbers come out, perhaps even maybe today, when those numbers come forward, that they are also up overall. What has us concerned here is that you will notice that the decline in tourism is on the left-hand side of the 1 October event as well as the right-hand side. Yes, 1 October created additional instability in our market, but that instability was here before the events of 1 October, and I think that's something we need to talk about more. Average daily room rate has risen, albeit relatively slightly, and even gross gaming revenue has shown signs of increasing, a positive for us overall. If we are going to have a conversation about where we are going to go from here, 2019 and beyond, there are a few things that I think we are going to have to focus on, but they are all tied up, I believe, in a single word, and that is sustainability. We have worked so hard in this community to get back from an economic downturn and to grow, but it is the decisions that we will make today, not the decisions that we will make when we enter the next economic downturn, that are going to determine how well we weather that downturn or how much we grow or any of those type of things. Our growth has not been somehow by accident. It has been a series of good choices. And we have things that are laying out there that are true problems and remain today. And the time to attack them is when the economy is good, not when the economy is bad. I don't know if anybody knows this number. It probably has been out there relatively significantly. 324,000. Anybody know this number? This is the total number of kids in the Clark County school system today. How are we going to create jobs for all these kids? 324,000 jobs for the kids that are likely to come out. Today, only 1/3, actually less than 1/3, 30% of the students that will come out of the Clark County School District will get a 4-year degree in college, and of course, substantially more jobs than that require it, right? This is Senator Mo Dennis today. Right? Anybody? He's a great guy. He's been working on finding a way to restructure education funding. This is Senator Mo Dennis when the Nevada plan for funding education was created when he was in first grade in 1967, right? Yeah, no, nothing's changed between now and 1967, obviously, other than Mo, of course, who was handsome then and is certainly handsome now, right? If we're going to think about it in terms of sustainability, today we have the 19th highest paid teachers in the United States. That's fine. That's where we should be, kind of the middle of the pack, if you will. But the way we have done that is essentially by jamming more kids into the classroom in order to be able to pay teachers more. And the result of that is that we now have the highest student-teacher ratio in the entire United States. And what that means is that while we may have the 19th highest paid teachers in the United States, unless you convert them to pay per pupil, and then they are among the lowest paid teachers in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest to you that this is unsustainable relative to how we are ultimately going to fund education. 42 million, this is one that we should all probably know. This is the number of visitors, the number of people that get in a plane, get in a car, get on a plane, get in a car, come to Southern Nevada, spend billions of dollars while they are here, right? I think sometimes we have forgotten just how important, we think about diversity and diversification, how important that industry is. 450,000 of our jobs, $19 billion in wages and salaries. You see the economic impact, the share of general fund revenue, taxes collected, all of those type of things, right? This is our new visitor, right? Get used to it. He's our guy, right? What are we doing to make sure that this guy has the best experience that he can have across the board? I love this guy. This is Selfie Man, right? He represents a whole new generation of visitors, and we need to find a way to embrace that. Why? As scary of this chart is, this could be the most frightening chart ever. Here it is. Gen Z is now the largest population group in the United States today. And if you don't think that they do things differently, if you don't think they think about visitors differently, if you don't think they do those things, we're crazy about that. At the same time, if you don't think that the folks that are coming to Las Vegas are considering places like Nashville or places like Austin as alternatives to Las Vegas, you're crazy. If you don't think that all of the convention centers that are being expanded and grown are designed specifically to try to take work away, conventions away, trade shows away from Las Vegas, you're crazy. If you don't think that there are communities across the United States that would give their eye teeth to have the National Finals Rodeo in their backyard, you're nuts. And what is it that we are doing to make sure that their experience is the absolute best it can be? What are we doing to invest in that? How are we handling McCarran International Airport? How are we handling I-15? How are we making sure that that customer experience, if we start to think about those visitors as a cash cow and that industry as a cash cow, I am concerned that that complacency is going to hurt us. And we hear about it in any number of different forms. But if we are worried about revenue at the expense of the visitor experience and living the brand that we have spent so long cultivating, that could be one of the greatest threats to our economic vitality over the next several years. Finally is this one. 54,685. You probably won't know this one. This is the total number of businesses that are in Southern Nevada today. Almost 55,000 businesses. We talk about economic development. We talk about economic diversification. It is the intersection between the two that is the greatest potential for us as an economy. I want Google to be incredibly successful. I want Amazon to be incredibly successful here. I want Resorts World to build that sucker up, bring in folks from all over the world, bring in new tourists and new travelers. I want Aptiv to have every car be with no driver in it. I would love to not drive in a car, right? There is no project I want to be more successful than this one for any number of reasons. I want drones to be manufactured, developed. I want them to rain out of the sky and bring me soap and food and everything else that I want in real time. It's going to take investment in infrastructure. Are we willing to make it? Right? But at the end of the day, when I looked at the sponsors that were here and I thought about all the new companies, all the new friends that we have made, Cox just celebrated its 20-year anniversary. Nevada State Bank has been around this year for 60 years. NV Energy, since its roots all the way back to 1928, right? We need to make Nevada strong, Southern Nevada strong for every business that is here because that is how our economy is going to grow. Yes, we want to diversify the economy, but economic development is about ensuring that every business is here because all these businesses can expand, but ones that have helped us grow, have been part of our economy, the fabric of who we are, and some of the small businesses that are here. Mindy Zarlul is the small business person of the year from Crazy Pita, moved here from Morocco, $300 in his pocket, and is now creating a franchise that he can be proud of, and the small business person of the year. That American dream still exists here. We look at the women-owned business of the year. Hale Lane, this is Leila Hale, a Henderson business that is the small woman-owned business of the year. And the veteran-owned business of the year, JetBlue Training, Blue Training, I'm going to forget the actual name. This is James Chef Barlow and has done remarkable things overall. My point here is that it is the intersection between our existing economy and our new economy, the things we do incredibly well and the new friends we are making that expand the opportunities in terms of who we are. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so thankful for the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to be part of this community, and I hope your 2019 is incredibly prosperous. Thank you very much.